Thanks everyone for joining us. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty here as we're trying to bring people together across the country. And we're having troubles with Chicago at the moment. Let's see. We're going old school. Greg Richmond?
Hey.
Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
this is working for me.
Right. So I'm just going to patch you through via my cell phone to, Renita, could you hear Greg when he spoke?
I could, yes.
Okay, so we're just going to make this work with what we've got, which everybody's been doing for the last 8 months anyway, so why should this be any different? My name is Terry Ryan, and I'm the moderator for this session on COVID-19 and the need for strong charter school governance. And I have joining me on this panel 3 outstanding people, Renita Thurcall, and they're all going to introduce themselves more in a couple minutes, Ethan Ashley down in New Orleans, and Greg Richmond in Chicago. And I'm in Boise, Idaho. And I know we've got folks from all over the country. So thanks for joining us. We stumbled into this topic. My organization, Bloom, received a federal charter school program grant in 2018. One of the things that we promised to do was to put together a series of videos on charter school governance. And so about a year ago, we started that process, and those videos have subsequently come out. But as you all are living, COVID-19 has interjected itself. And actually, we've seen the governance issue, which has always been incredibly important for our charter schools. We see it as now being even more critical because of the decisions that so many of our schools across the country are having to make around things like what we were just talking about. You know, do you require everybody in your school to wear a mask? Well, in some communities, that might be an easy decision to make. In other more rural communities, it's not. What do we do about opening and staying open, or do we go hybrid? So we're asking nonprofit charter school boards to make some really tough decisions that, frankly, when they make a decision, half the people in their community are probably going to not like the decision that they make, while the other half may. So this issue of charter school governance to us is something that's always been important to those of us who work in charters, but now it's even more critical. And so the way we're going to start with this is that I'm going to ask Renita to, in about 2 minutes, introduce herself and share with us her role in the charter school sector. And then I'm going to ask Ethan to do the same, and then I'm going to ask Greg Richmond to do that. And then we'll dive into our topic at hand. So with that, Renita, if you could just introduce yourself and tell us who you are, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, Terry. I have one question. Is now time to tell our anecdotes, or does that come after introductions? I'm sorry.
I think, well, we could pivot. You want to do the anecdote now, or do you want to do it after introductions?
Introductions sound great. Let's start that way.
Let's start there, and then we'll do the anecdote after that.
Thanks, Terry. Hi, everyone. My name is Renita Thurcall. I'm an attorney. I have the honor of playing a lot of different roles inside the charter school community. I work with the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools as their senior legal advisor. And in that role, I advise a lot of national litigation. That litigation often comes up in the context of charter schools that are facing political battles. So in many ways, I've seen the trajectory of charter schools grow in the country, and then they face more and more political barriers and obstacles. The boards are at the center of those battles as they face more increasing hostility, scrutiny, and opportunity. And so I'm very honored to speak with you all today about the importance of board governance, quality board governance, and especially, Terry said, at this time when boards are under even more pressure to make difficult choices in a difficult time with sometimes even fewer resources than before. So we really admire the work that all of you are doing for your schools and communities, and those of you who are serving on boards, the incredible work you're doing as volunteers to guide the schools into successful times or through successful times.
Thank you, Renita. And so, Ethan, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Terry. Really, you did an excellent job. So Ethan Ashley, I have the opportunity of serving, and I apologize. Let me just start here. You all might not be able to see my beautiful face, but I promise you I'm smiling at you. Now is that I have the best internet in the world, which is AT&T, and so I'm gonna have a good conversation with them after this about how much I really value their business. So I'm gonna start there. Hopefully they're not sponsors of this conference, I hope. But I want to acknowledge that I am out of New Orleans. I serve as the board president for the New Orleans School Board. And prior to serving as the board president for the New Orleans School Board, I had the opportunity to work in the education sector in various capacities. From doing literacy work locally to doing community engagement and parent organizing, and ultimately having the opportunity to be elected in 2016 and have worked with a bunch of different schools across the sector, both traditional and public charter schools. And many of you all know that New Orleans is a largely all charter school district. And so as an authorizer of charter schools, I have the opportunity to see the governance of the good, the bad, and definitely the ugly. And so having the opportunity to chat with you guys today, I am going to be as transparent as legally possible. We know that there might be some stuff where there might be some legal challenges happening. So I'm not going to give it to them all, Terry, but I'm going to be as transparent as possible throughout the process around what good governance looks like. What does challenging governance look like, where ultimately we end up in a legal battle? And then let's talk about how we can get to good governance across the board. So glad to be here.
Well, thank you for that, Ethan. And I just have to share, Renita, you could kick him in the leg if he was here. But when I was an authorizer and we had an issue with a school and we had to actually give testimony to the FBI, the lawyer said to me, if I kick you in the leg, stop talking. So if you feel like the need to kick somebody in the leg, just raise your hand. Grab your ear. All right, there you go. All right. I don't know if you can see Ethan, but if she grabs your ear, you have to stop.
I love it.
All right, Greg Richmond, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Terry, and Ethan, and Renita. I'm in a worse spot than Ethan is. I know you've been having complete Wi-Fi failure in my house today, but Terry patched me in over the phone, so appreciate that. My background, I've been in the charter space for about 24 years. Started out when I was with the Chicago Public Schools. And for about 10 years in Chicago, I oversaw all the charter schools in the city. Had just a fantastic time working with educators and community organizations that were starting schools. In 2005, I took over and ran the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. Did that for almost 15 years. Included doing a lot of work in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Was very honored to be invited in there. Did a stint from 2011 to 2015 as the chairman of the Illinois State Charter School Commission, a statewide authorizer, and now for almost a year, I'm working with Bloom, helping people who are starting and running good schools. So I've seen the charter world as an authorizer, as on staff, as an authorizing board member, and now I'm actually on a couple of charter school boards myself. I have a huge respect and appreciation for the importance of charter school board governance.
So thank you, Greg. We've got a really outstanding trio here, and thanks to all three of you for agreeing to do this. So Renita, we're now going to jump right into the anecdote. And what we're going to do here is each of our panelists are going to take 5 minutes to basically tell a story about the good, the bad, and or the ugly around charter school governance as they've seen it and they have lived it. So Renita, I'm going to ask you to go first, and thank you.
Great. Thank you, Terry. And I am excited to talk about the good, the bad, and or the ugly. I'm going to start with the good. It's Monday morning. I'm out here in the Bay Area, so it's really Monday morning for me. And I like to start by thinking about the good things and the good work that all of you were doing around the country and the way that that work can help communities and your schools shine. So I remember many years ago, I was working with a school in the Southeast. I'll leave the state unnamed. And it was opening up against all the odds. It was one of the first schools in the state and certainly in their community. And they were facing a lot of political and legal battles to get off the ground. And this board was undeterred. They were the founding board, and they were deeply committed to getting the school started, no matter what it took, no matter how many political and legal barriers were thrown up, and there were a lot. They pushed through. They had to weather a year delay, and then they were able to open. So when it came time for renewal, the founding board had transitioned off, and there were some new board members, and the school was doing incredible work. They were recognized for their work at renewal, and I think it was very surprising for that board to see how, when they went through their renewal process, that as board members, they received a lot of public accolades. The school board members, the charter board members, they were in the public eye. They were spokespeople. The media wanted to talk to them. Members of the political community wanted to talk to them. And I think it was very surprising to these board members who took on the work as volunteers. And it was just a tremendous amount of work, as all of you guys know, especially in the early years, as you develop processes and systems to set the school on the trajectory for success. And when that success came, these board members commented about how surprised they were that a volunteer role propelled them into a public position, right? They were part of the public dialogue in a way that I think they didn't expect. And in many respects, they were given more accolades than the educators, because, I mean, the educators were definitely given a lot of credit for all their hard work. But as board members, they were the ones who were the stewards of public resources, and they were the ones ultimately responsible for the success of the school and accountable under the charter. And so I think it was a somewhat surprising but very satisfying and heartfelt experience for the board members to see just how well received they were by the community at large for the incredible work they were doing, not just for their students and their parents and the community served by the school, but by the community more broadly. And so I thought it was just a great example of how you begin with one thing in mind, and it creates these incredible ripple effects that get acknowledged and appreciated far beyond maybe what you originally thought or might have realized you could do. And so I think it just was a really proud moment for them and for those of us who watched that school and all of those very deeply committed board members make that success happen. I mean, there's no better form of kind of local control and local engagement than the way in which these community members who served as volunteer board members then really became part of the public dialogue on public education in their community. So that was the good, and I wouldn't be much of a lawyer if I couldn't tell you something that was bad and or ugly, and so I'll keep this one short. This is not really an example of a particular school. It's more of a composite of what happens sometimes more frequently than we would like it to. It's when a school comes up for renewal and the board begin to think about, usually 12 months ahead of time, to make sure that they're able to complete their renewal applications and meet all the standards that are set forth in the charter contract and the law and authorizer policy. And many times these schools are doing fine academically, maybe not terrific, right? But certainly not in a concern zone, but just sort of in the middle, and financially the same. But when the board starts to look more closely at the performance of the school leader, they realize they don't have strong metrics to evaluate whether or not the school leader is doing what they thought the school leader would be doing or should be doing. So I can't tell you the number of times that we've seen that boards, as they dig into school performance, that they don't feel like they have a clear way to evaluate how well things are going. They know things aren't going badly, but they're not really sure if they're going as well as they could. And as a lawyer, right, I find that having clear documents is really helpful. So a clear performance contract with the school leader that the board understands how to put in place and evaluate, and then make good, provide good feedback and identify problems before they arise. That is something that we often don't see as much of as we would like to. And we understand it. As board members, many people are not educators, and it can be very, very intimidating to understand how to hold a school leader and the leadership team accountable, because you as a board member, and when I've been a board member, I felt the same, you know you can't do what they do, and you want to give them as much space to do their work, and you trust them. But there's an important balance there between trusting and believing in the school leadership and also having a clear way that everyone agrees on about holding the school leadership accountable. And I think when that's in place, you can actually identify the bad and the ugly before it gets too bad or too ugly. And then you can start to make changes in a way that's productive and keeps the school as healthy as possible.
That's great. There's actually a number of things we can come back to on that. So, Ethan, I'll turn it over to you and New Orleans.
Well, first of all, that was excellent. I was definitely enjoying that, and so I'm gonna go a little deeper, and I'm gonna probably, y'all might not ask me back after this, so I'm just gonna be honest. Let's go into founding boards, right? Your founding boards. I have this experience where we're going to call this the lack of succession planning, right? And so you have a founding board who's really strong or, really connected to the CEO, and that goes well. But that founding board gets tired and then they move on. And what happens is, and I've seen this happen in a number of our boards who then come up for renewal and they don't have the proper documentation, as Renita talked about, but there's just not a continuous learning of all board members around all things. And that ultimately causes for the board to not be functioning as well as they could, right? Meaning, largely the two major things, and Renita's already talked about one of them, which is like evaluating your CEO and holding them accountable for all of the academic rigors that should be happening, but also just the fiduciary duty of making sure that your organization is doing what it's supposed to be doing fiscally. And so if you are not an accountant, you don't have a finance background, and you are looking at $1 million plus budget, do not feel ashamed in saying, I don't understand what this budget to actual means. What does this look like? How are we? You are on that board for a particular reason. And what happens is we normally give certain people, well, that's the budget guy. And if the budget guy knows, and we designate people in roles, and we're all on the board, and we're all supposed to be responsible for those things. So I just want to say that I've seen boards who started off really strong, but they didn't do a really good job of succession planning, and they have isolated roles to individual people. And then when those people are tired or they stop functioning at a higher level, because you guys are in fact volunteers, and no one's going to slight you for that. But that becomes a challenge for student success, for making sure that we're managing those things well around fiscal responsibility as well as academic responsibility. And so I just want you to know, just succession planning is big, and just continuous learning. I mean, there should always be, as much as we have PD days for all of our teachers and educators, you need a PD day for the board. You got to learn what it means to read your P&Ls, and you got to learn what it means to make sure that you know how to hold your CEO accountable. But I'm also here, Renita, for a actual document to walk through your evaluation process and make sure it's clean. Now, look, on the Let's give a positive. On a positive note, fundraising, right? The thing that I enjoy most about the ability of our charter schools is their ability to raise funds outside of the local context of funding, which is normally a mix of taxes and some state allocation. And so, being able to raise funds, and those funds are able to be tax write-offs for individuals, is really, really important. And so, I've watched boards, particularly during COVID-19, do an excellent job of raising funds for technology for young people. And if you are really good with your communications and with your ability to have your fundraising in order, I think you could do a really good thing here. Now, I will say, for us, many of folks were looking to Congress when COVID hit, because our schools were asked to do so much more than what they have been traditionally asked to do, and Congress was with I think a small line item in terms of the monies that they gave to us. in terms of the education piece, but they gave a lot of money to small businesses. And the good thing about the charter sector was that the charter sector was able to take advantage of some of those small business loans in some respects. And I think that was, if you were good as a board to really do your due diligence, you were able to also raise money in that regard and to be able to get the technology that the kids need and make sure that you're able to give them the type of health and safety measures and put those things in place, the PPE, as well as just making sure we're feeding them and doing all the things that we can during this time. So I say all that to say fundraising is a big deal, and also succession planning. So I'll leave it there, and we can come back to some of those things.
Yeah, that's great. And so for those listening in, you are going to have the opportunity to ask questions. And so start thinking about what questions that you want to ask, and we'll take those. Greg Richmond, please. You got your 5 minutes.
Sure. Great lessons learned from both Rita and Ethan. I'll share an anecdote that is, I think it's both positive. It started as a negative, turned into a positive. It goes back to my days when I was authorizing charter schools in Chicago, and we paid our charter schools quarterly. And the arrangement we set up was that in order for me to give you the school, your next quarterly payment, your next quarterly check, you had to give me your quarterly financial report from the last quarter, right? So that's how we worked it. That was our financial monitoring. And we had one school turned in its second quarter financial report before getting its third quarter payment. And when my staff and I looked at their financial report, it was very clear that they were not going to have enough cash to make it through the end of the school year if they continued at their current pace. This is exactly why we asked for these reports, as kind of as a warning, as a dashboard light, as a warning. And we alerted the school, including the school's board, that the school was on track to run out of money, not be able to finish the school year the way the spending was occurring through the first half of the school year. And the school board was not aware of that, had not received the same quarterly financial information that we in the authoriser's office had requested. They just didn't know it. They didn't know they were in danger of going under. So fortunately, what we did as an authorizer was simply require them to put in a financial plan that allowed them to survive the rest of the year, which is what they then did. But the lesson learned there was that the bad news was that the board hadn't been already receiving financial monitoring reports. They weren't keeping their eye on that ball. The good news is that they were able to pivot, put those in place after we'd alerted them to that. So then they had a policy in place to get that data. And that ongoing monitoring is a crucial, it's not the only responsibility of the board, but it's a crucial responsibility of the board. It's not the board member's job to do the finances or to produce the report, but it is the board's job to require regular financial reporting, to keep an eye on those reports, and to require the staff to take appropriate action to maintain the viability of the organization. So that's a core function of charter school boards, that ongoing monitoring, whether it's finances or academics or maybe some compliance requirements. Monitor the important things around the functioning of your school, and require set goals that you want the school to achieve, and if you're not achieving them, require staff to take action to achieve them.
So thank you, Greg. We're going to dive into questions now, and you guys don't be shy about giving answers based on your real life experience here. The first question is around the issue of sort of the charter school and its image and the personality. And I think it was Renita that was talking about the fact that these are, to a degree, a political body, depending on the state, depending on the community, depending on the politics. But oftentimes the charter school boards can be something that is picked up by television stations or other media outlets. So when you are forming a charter school and when you're building your team, how do you think about the creation of your team, because they are going to be the face of the school. They're going to be an important part of the face of the school. So what is it that you recommend to schools that they should be thinking about in terms of the structure of their team, in terms of the sort of the outward facing of the group?
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in and just say really quickly that the makeup of your board and your team should be diverse and definitely representative of the community in which you serve. I think that's the one thing that's important about the charter schools, right? I mean, your charter schools in some respect was to give local control to local communities about what's happening in terms of schooling for their communities and young people. And so, you know, being able to truly use this, I think is important. And so when we see schools that aren't reflective of their board isn't reflective of the people in that community, the board, the not just the board, but the CEO and so on and so forth, they're not reflective of the folks in that community. And those folks in that community are in fact educated and well educated enough to be able to lead schools in that respect and serve on boards in that respect. I think that is where we as a charter movement and otherwise start to get a bad name for what it is that we're doing. And I think we have to be very vigilant about this. There is clearly the pandemic of systemic racism of 400 plus years that we are still dealing with. I think it has come to the forefront this summer and beyond with the mass, with the continuation of shootings of Black and brown people. And I just want to be clear, it is our mandate to make sure that our systems are moving towards a more anti-racist and racially equitable state of being. And so, you know, you definitely want to be diverse and reflective of the population. And I think you also want to make sure that someone on your team can be responsible for communications. You need someone, I think we go about someone doing budget, someone doing law, and someone doing your academics, but you need someone who can also do communications. Communications is huge.
No, that's a great point, especially now, and with around all the issues that you brought up, Ethan, as well as then explaining the policies within the school around COVID. You know, why are we going hybrid, or why are we having afternoon this way, morning that way, or why is it we can't bus? All the things you're talking about there, and a lot more. I don't know, Renita, Greg, would you guys like to add something more to that?
The only thing I would add, and Ethan, I couldn't agree with you more about everything you said. And I would underscore all of it as well, is that, especially as Terry is saying, during COVID, empowering all of the board members to use the unified communications plan that the person who on the board does to help develop, like empowering every board member to engage the community about why the school is doing what it's doing, and creating a sense of we're in this together and we're all working together to serve you, and inviting feedback, right? Empowering the board members to understand what's happening and to engage in public conversation and then listen in return, right? Really trying to deepen a partnership with the community, especially during a time when everybody is trying to figure out how best to serve kids and families. That this is a partnership with the community, and having more board members from the community and of the community makes that dialogue much more authentic, where you are talking and, more importantly, listening.
Issues of trust. Greg, you want to chime in on this?
I don't think I could say it better than Ethan and Renita just did.
Okay, so we've got schools that opened this August, and we've got folks that are now working across the country and planning to open a school in August of 2021. Mm-hmm. So I'll start with you, Greg. Start there. I mean, and because you're on a board right now that's planning to open a school in 2021, how are you thinking about the issues of governance when everything's going on that is happening right now, but you're also planning? I mean, do you plan for normal, and what might that look like? So what's your advice on those of us who are working in schools that are just open or are going to open next year?
Yeah, great question. I'm on a couple of charter school boards, and I think one of a school that is planning to open next fall, and another of a school that has been operating for years. And you know, the universal advice I would give to boards and their school leaders is to be in good communication with each other about expectations the board has for the school leader, and vice versa, around the issue of, how are we going to open, how are we going to operate. Whether it's boards I'm on or boards, other charter school boards I'm working with, I'm a little bit spent, whatever it's been, 9 months now, of how the board and the staff sometimes have not been in good communication with each other around how to open and operate the school. And both should be viewing each other as a resource and having very explicit conversations about the criteria and the process and the communication to families and the community about how there's no one right answer. Instead, boards and their school leaders need to talk about the criteria, the process, and the communication, and get on the same page about how and when these decisions will be made.
Ethan, Renita, you want to add anything to that?
I think that's excellent advice. I think you certainly as a board want to look at creating health and safety protocols across the board that you guys can be aligned on. I would definitely say that it probably makes sense in this moment in time as well to create a racial equity audit of your policies, just so you are staying on top of how your policies may be exacerbating any of the achievement gaps that happen around racial lines. And then, look, I think be fiscally responsible in this moment. I mean, I think we have a looming economic recession that may happen in certain places, depending on what your city's or state's income is based off of. I live in Louisiana. We are largely a tourist-based economy in New Orleans, and so with our many folks coming, I think we have a looming economic recession that's really a problem. And so thinking about creating partnerships with corporate bodies or other philanthropic organizations that may be able to get you through financially. And then I think the thing that we are very clear about in this moment is like testing. What's going to happen with academic testing and making sure that you stay on top of in terms of your authorizer and you making sure your CEO stays on top of that, because testing may or may not happen. It didn't happen last year for many of the states, if not all the states. And so you got to make sure when it comes to your renewal period, what does that look like? Do you have more time? Can you negotiate something and figure out, how that's going to roll?
Well, I'd love to come back around to that issue of testing and data and how we even know that what we're doing in our schools is really not exacerbating gaps, is actually working for our students. But before we go there, Renita, I'd like to ask you, from a legal perspective, issues that have been popping up that you've been having to help boards address around some of the topics that Ethan just brought up. What can you tell us on that front?
That's a great question, and I appreciate you kind of thinking about it from a legal perspective as well, Terry. There are two things that come up. One is liability potentially associated with reopening. Another is accommodation for employees who may have special health needs, and boards need to understand how to accommodate those health needs in this time. And then the third is related to what Ethan was just saying around renewals. In addition to thinking about how academic performance metrics are evolving, thinking about how your growth plans may need to evolve, either because the way in which kids are learning is changing, and so what you thought was going to be your growth plan now needs to be adapted. Maybe it's a longer trajectory that you grow over, or maybe you're growing more rapidly, right? But some of the vision that you had in the past about how your school was going to grow may need to be revisited. It also is possible that in some places, because the financial recession that may hit in some places could create a more adverse fiscal impact on districts when charters expand. And we're starting to see that could actually create headwind when a school tries to expand. So even though you may have been approved to expand, when it comes time to actually implementing the expansion, your authorizer may have more trouble with it, especially if you're dealing with a local district authorizer. So it's best in this situation just to not be surprised. So the sooner you can start having conversations with your authorizers about what their considerations are, the sooner you can begin to figure out what your options are. I think right now what we can't do is expect that it'll be business as usual, that even in 12 months that we'll be able to pick up where we left off. I think we have to be imagining new versions of what we were doing and thinking about how to adapt our past plans to the new opportunities that exist. So it's in some ways a very difficult time, but also a very exciting time to work as a team, the team being the board, the school, the community, and also, when possible, with the authorizer as early as possible, because everybody hopefully is trying to solve the same problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so Ethan, I want to circle back to you, and Greg, you should chime in on this too. I mean, how are you looking at school performance? How are you looking at knowing that certain things that the schools are doing are actually having an impact in terms of student learning, student engagement, while other things aren't? I mean, how do you as a school in this time self-correct? You know, we might believe that online is really the way to go, but we're struggling when it comes to I'm making this up, our literacy portion of it. How are you as a board member, as an authorizer, how do you think about performance and actually knowing what's working and what's not right now? I hope we haven't lost Ethan.
No, I'm right here. So I think the first thing is just a consistency of assessment in this moment. I mean, we're having to do something that we've never had to do before, which is like truly get a holistic view of what schools are doing and determine whether or not they are actually meeting the needs of the community in which they serve, which is like a full audit of a school. And so even our as an authorizer, we're actually changing in this moment our accountability measures just so we're broadening them. So because obviously we don't have actual test scores, and so I think this is a good thing. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I think that we shouldn't be so beholden simply to exams, but I think we should figure out how we can get to a more holistic audit and evaluation of schools. Because I think they'll tell us much more. The challenge here, right, as an authorizer living off of 2% of the total monies allocated to our district, which is one of the least amounted. We're actually one of the leanest central offices in the state of Louisiana because of that, because we push the majority of our dollars directly into schools per charter law. You know, the challenge there is just having the capacity to do that for every school that is being, you know, going through the reauthorization process. And that shouldn't be something that stops us. I just think that we also need to make it a norm, right? And so, you know, in my personal opinion, I think when we get there, I think it'll be the right thing to do, but there definitely needs to be more balance, in my personal opinion.
So, Greg, what should or could charter school boards and authorizers be looking at in terms of knowing that, hey, this is a school, despite the craziness of the times, it's delivering, or hey, this school's really struggling? What are the indicators? What are the things that charter school boards and authorizers should be looking at and talking about?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important question to be exploring right now. What it actually would be at any time, but our current situation with the fact that we did not have the standardized tests last spring, and who knows what's going to happen next spring, really highlights an opportunity in the charter school world that I think is important to seize upon. And here's what I mean by that. I'm doing some work with a charter school in a city. The school's been around for more than a decade, and it was founded on a focus, yes, on academics, but equally on social and emotional learning, equally on a concern about some of the problems in the communities where the school served, problems of gang violence. All of those things were social emotional learning, academics, community issues were all critical to the founding of the school. And I started working with them this year, and I asked the chair of the board, and then I asked the CEO of the school. I said, "Well, what's your goal for the coming school year?" I asked last summer, and they said, "Well, their goal for the coming school year was to get their state accountability score up to level 1. You know, they had been at level 1, dropped down to level 2. They wanted to get back up to level 1." And I was really taken aback by that, because that is a very narrow definition of success I'd say for any school, but for what I knew about this school. Everything they were founded on, around the whole development of the entire child, around concern for the community, had withered away and been replaced by their goal is whatever the state accountability score is, get it up to level 1. Now, that's good to have a level 1, but this school is founded to be a lot more than that. And that's the opportunity charter schools have that a lot of traditional district-run schools don't have. A charter school has the ability to establish a broad set of goals and aspirations for what they want to achieve with their students, their families, and their community. And as a board, as a member of a board of a charter school, that is your job 1, to establish that reason for why we exist. What is our vision? What is our mission? Why does this school exist? I said to the leader of the school I was just talking about, this school wasn't created many years ago in order to be a level 1 performance. In fact, that state accountability system didn't even exist at the time the school was created. This school was created for much bigger reasons than that. So the board of a charter school, that's your job, is to know why you exist, define it, set the goals, monitor those goals. And this is a moment in time with the lack of state tests for you to revisit that question. Why do we exist? How are we defining our success? What do we want to be a year from now, 5 years from now? What do we want for our kids, for our communities? You're a charter school. You get to do this. So the board, that's your number 1 job, is to establish that reason for existence.
No, that's great. Ethan, Renita, would you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add, and again, I couldn't agree with Greg more. I think the way he said it is perfect. I would add only that you need to also understand what your legal obligations are. And Ethan touched on this earlier when he mentioned the importance of understanding what it means to have a fiduciary duty that you fulfill. And so in the context of understanding mission and vision, also understanding, for instance, what does that mean for purposes of serving students with disabilities? Like, how do you make sure you are abiding the law on that? And again, you're going to trust your school leadership to make the specific decisions about how students are served, but you as a board are going to make sure that that is part of what the school is thinking about at all times. From a liability perspective, from a financial perspective, you always want to make sure that you're staying on the correct side of those kinds of legal obligations. So you want to understand what they are. You know, one thing I would say, and this I think goes along with Greg's point around understanding the mission and the vision of the school, charter applications are the backbone of the charter contract. And as board members, you guys are responsible to adhere to the charter contract. And I'm always a little disheartened when I hear how many board members don't actually read the charter application or charter contract, and they don't fully understand all the detail that's in there. I understand they're often very, very long documents, and it's hard to read a 500 or 600 page document, but understanding with some fluency about what the table of contents are, what the key components are, how the school has decided, to Greg's point, to define its mission and vision explicitly in the charter application and charter contract, because again, as the board, those are the terms that you're being held accountable to. So you want to understand kind of what they are at a high level, and also to some extent what the details are, because that also should inform the way you hold your school leadership accountable.
So I think it was Ethan who mentioned like PD, have a PD day for your board members. Is that an area where you could start your PD day? Is this all take stock of what we've committed ourselves to do and what we've promised to do? Ethan, I guess maybe this is a question for you. Do you have schools that every year they, as a group, take stock, look at their charter agreement, look at what they've promised, benchmark it? I mean, what's your advice on that front as a board member to ensure that not only do I know what's in my charter agreement, but I'm actually thinking about it in ways where I can ask school leadership good questions. How would you answer that?
Well,
Ethan, I'm
a
hoping.
shot at answering that, which is to say, what you're monitoring as a board, what you should be regularly monitoring a board is how well your school is achieving those things that you've defined as critical to your existence. And to Renita's point, as well as the legal financial compliance requirements you have. But this is not that you should only check in on every couple of years or even once a year. When your board meets, you should be getting reports from your staff on how well you're doing on achieving your goals.
Ethan, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would just say this is probably one of the things that I fought pretty hard on in New Orleans when I first was elected. I actually, as an elected school board member, I have a mandate to have a certain amount of continuing education credits to go to conferences like this, we'll learn from folks. There's very little mandate around charters in the same respects, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I wanted to acknowledge that there needed to be, at least on the authorizer side, a sense of what we are expecting of you, because once you join the board, which you don't join the board, like the authorizer has no say on who joins the board or how they join the board or whether or not they read their charter contract. And so what we did was we put in a policy to say when you are a new board member, you have to come to a new to orientation with the district, because at the end of the day, when you come before us, when it's time to get authorized, I don't want you to be set up for failure because you didn't know as a new board member what this meant or what you were like, what the commitment was, what we expected from you, and all those things. And I think, there's often this us versus them mentality, but for me, it's not that. It's at the end of the day, I've had so many charter board members who cried to me on the other end saying, I wish I would have known, I wish they would have given me more information, or I wish I just had a sense of what the authorizer was looking for. And so I wanted us to get out of that mindset in New Orleans. And I definitely suggest this around the country. Like, as an authorizer, when a new board member or new board chair is assigned as the board chair, you have that meeting with them, you bring them in, you tell them what the expectation is so that they're not caught flat-footed when it's time for them to go through their reauthorization process.
That's great. There's a question from Tennessee, and it's around a school. It's in its second year. And how would you recommend the school explain its successes, what it's done well in the last 2 years? If there's no data, if there's how to tell the story of a school over the last couple of years in a way that an authorizer can understand and get.
So, I mean, me personally, I think it's important to make sure that you talk about some of the key things that we've talked about here today, right? So legally, how you've been compliant in terms of special education, all your federal dollars, that you've been a good steward of monies, that you are fiscally healthy, right? I think that's important. I think it's also really important beyond that to show whether it's MAP or, because there's other assessment tools that you utilize to determine where you all are at academically, and being able to put that in such a way where your district can see and understand how there's been growth from your young people around wherever they were and where they're at. And it's not just the end of year school test, school exam that I think can be considered. And then I just think that that you've got to be clear to say and show what for your particular charter, as it was stated earlier by Greg, that you got to be able to show what are the other things that your charter is offering the community, whether it's whether it is a performing arts charter, whether it's a mathematics charter, whether you have food gardens, right? Show that you're doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing within your charter, and it's growing and developing in real respects. I'll leave it at there. I'm sure my colleagues might have more to add.
No, that's great. Renita or Greg, you had something?
Only if you did any interesting adaptations or innovations to keep your parents and students engaged during COVID, since this is the early part of your life as a school. You may have done some really interesting things that you didn't anticipate doing, but you did anyway because your kids and families needed them. And so I would take the time to highlight those things and talk about how that illustrates your deep commitment to the work that you do, no matter what circumstances show up, and that you're going to keep doing those things. I mean, I don't think that replaces the recommendations that Ethan offers, but I think it could be a nice supplement to make sure that your authorizer fully appreciates everything that you're thinking.
Greg, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think this conversation, this example emphasizes that I'd say it's true for any school, but especially for charter schools, you shouldn't be relying solely on two state-required standardized tests to define your school's quality. This is the point I was trying to make earlier around the school I was talking to that's over 10 years old. That's what they ended up doing. They were defining their quality based on two state standardized tests, a math test and English language arts test. There are many those. I think math and reading and writing are very important, but they're not the only things that are important in child development. Science, social studies. My goodness, have we learned anything the past 3 years about the importance of understanding civics and history and social studies? That's important. The health of your students, the mental health, the physical health. We have a huge problem in childhood obesity in this country. There are so many other things that additional things that we care about on human development that as a charter school, you can be identifying and measuring and saying we care about. And if you don't believe any of that, I'll give one example from a few years ago in a state I worked in a charter school where one of the official state standards was public speaking. Right? You went to the State Department of Education website and all the different standards, science, math, reading. Public speaking was one of the standards. And you know what? It wasn't measured by their standardized tests. Imagine that. That their standard bubble test didn't measure a student's ability in public speaking. Yet it was an official state standard. So this is what I mean by we have to broaden our definitions, our concept of school quality beyond two state tests every year. And the beauty is, as a charter school, you really get to do that in a way that district schools, unfortunately, often don't have the opportunity to do. So as a board, take advantage of that. Do it. You have a really rare special opportunity, and I encourage you to take advantage of it.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Thank you for that, Greg, because I do know there are some parents on this call. So if you're a parent of a child in a charter school or a grandparent or a guardian of a child in a charter school, just give us a sense of the questions or the approach that as a parent I should take with my charter school board. Should I regularly show up to board meetings and check in, or do I just show up when I have a problem? I mean, how, from a parent's perspective, do I most effectively and purposefully communicate with my charter school board so that I'm helping them get better, while at the same time making sure they have the best interest of my child at hand? Can you kind of help us think about that? I don't know who wants to jump in on that, or if anybody does.
Terry, look, I'll start. I mean, I am a parent of charter school students. My kids go to charter schools locally, and what I tell you is, even though I am the board president of our school district and authorizer, I spend time talking to our charter board members of the school in which my young people sit on, because I think it's important. But I will tell you that I am not the most engaged parent who are dealing with our charter board members. So what I will say is, anytime you can get involved, I would. I wouldn't just get involved when there's a problem. I definitely would get involved with like raising money for your school, all things that are related to school health, and development. I mean, it improves your school. So you definitely want to go through those leaders. And you know, I think some of the best leaders, probably like Greg and others who find themselves on boards, are consistently involved in community. And so, you know, I think that those are definitely things you want to get involved with in terms of showing up to meetings, but being consistent and figuring out how you can help raise money for the school with the board members and so on and so forth, and see if you want to join a committee. But yeah, I mean, normal everyday parents don't have time to be involved, I think, with all the charter board meetings, and that's okay. I just think that the entry shouldn't just be when there's something wrong, but if there is something wrong, you should definitely be able to get involved with them. But you know, I will tell you that most schools probably still have the protocol of going through the teacher and then going through the school leader and then going through the charter board. But you shouldn't feel any type of way of going to that charter board leader, because they're consistent with being a almost like an elected school board member, and they're just as, you know, they have just as much as authority.
That's great. Great. Renita, do you want to add?
No, I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Terry.
Terry, I do have one thing that if I was to say that I want to make sure I was said, and Renita said it earlier, but when it comes to making sure that everyone is evaluating your CEO, I think that is so crucial annually, only because of this one truth. When you want to fire someone or you want to let go of someone at that level, you need to have, that's a terrible thing. I hope that our viewers don't think that I'm just trying to fire someone. But if you want to let someone go, you want to make sure, even if you're in an at-will state, you still want to make sure that like you have the proper paperwork to show that they haven't met the, you know, with consistency. Or if you want to extend a contract in the same regard, it's easy to do if you have the consistent work showing that this person has done what they're supposed to do. And I can honestly say that there's many of charter boards who do not evaluate their charter school. Hell, there's a lot of elected boards that don't evaluate their damn CEO or superintendent consistently. So I'm gonna just say that.
Yep. Greg, you want to add something on that in 30 seconds?
Well, no, I thought he said it well. I was just wondering if Renita was going to try to kick him under the table.
She was grabbing, she was yanking at her ear. So, Renita, question.
He's absolutely right.
A question for you, Renita, that just came in. What's the legal ramifications of having a voting student on a charter school board?
Yeah, I saw that question. It's a terrific question, and I'm going to probably offer a somewhat less than satisfying answer. My instinct on that is that it probably depends on the bylaws and your state charter law and authorizer policy on that. I mean, I don't know how old the student is. I guess the bylaws are the document that allows the student not only a position on the board, but also voting rights. So, I mean, I guess I'm not entirely clear what legal ramifications you're thinking about, but some of that stuff will be laid out in the bylaws, the authorizer policy, and then the charter law itself.
So check out.
Oh, sorry.
No, I mean, check out your agreement and talk to a lawyer is what you're saying. Look, we've got a couple minutes left, and I want to give you guys each about 45 seconds to leave whatever parting thoughts that you want. I only have one. We've got some really good things on governance videos that I recommend to everybody on this at www.bloom.org. So please check that out. But I'll start with you, Renita. What's the one thought you would want to leave with charter school board members going into the next weeks and months?
I first want to thank you for taking on this work at this time. I couldn't imagine a more challenging time to be sitting in your shoes. I have also served on charter boards, and it's a Herculean task to begin with, and to think about managing all of the variables you're dealing with now, with as many high stakes as you're dealing with, and children sitting in the middle of all of that. So just to begin with thanking you. And then I think the big picture on, in addition to making sure you're hitting your academic marks and your financial marks, and of course, complying with the law, I think it's so important to tell your story, and to tell your story collaboratively with your community, because you guys are really creating the narrative as you go, and people are drawn to stories, and especially good stories, even stories about we were struggling and we made these improvements. I think it's a very human story, and I wouldn't shy away from telling that story in a thoughtful, coordinated way.
Awesome. Ethan, what would you leave people with in 30 seconds?
Yeah, it's your time. I mean, this is the time for you to lead. And, people will remember what happened in history in 2020. And so if there was ever a time for you to step up and show that you are competent or willing to learn something new and willing to push the edge for kids, this is the time, and our kids need you to do it. And so we really appreciate you, and this is the time.
Thank you, Ethan. And Greg?
Know why it exists, know how you would define success, and then monitor how well you're doing against that expectation. That job as a charter school board.
Thank you. You guys were awesome. You're a great panel. I would say a round of applause, but I don't know how to do that here. And I just want to say thank you so much, and thank you to the folks who were on this. And I hope that there were some valuable things that you learned. And with that, I think we're done. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Renita. Thank you, Greg.
Pleasure to meet you.